Welcome back. We head now to Argentina, where we're following major developments coming out of the G20 Summit in Buenos Aires. President Trump has made a shocking announcement. Let's head over to RT host Scottie Nell Hughes, who brings us the latest. Scottie, not a great day for those of us betting on diplomacy here. What's the latest?
Absolutely, Anya. And I have to tell you, we have a lot more questions right now than we have answers. The White House had just released, basically this morning, President Trump's full schedule, including the meeting on that President Putin. In fact, earliest reports coming from other journalists that are on Air Force One with him said that even an hour ago he had gone back and had talked about that he was going to meet with President Putin. The President Putin staff as well said that the meeting was on schedule. Then all of a sudden a tweet comes out, and those in Moscow are reporting as well that this took President Putin and his team by surprise because they were already on their way here. So this is just coming out of the air to a certain extent. Now, what we are finding out is that Sarah Huckabee Sanders has said that there was a phone call that happened probably 30 minutes before President Trump had tweeted. On that phone call, you had John Bolton, who is in Brazil for the swearing in of Bolsonaro. And you also had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, as well as Chief of Staff John Kelly. At that point, the decision was made to cancel the trip. Now, supposedly back channels were contacted to Moscow, to President Putin's team, but those had not necessarily made it through. So President Trump, like he does so often on some of these trips, on these long flights, decided to tweet. Now, I don't know necessarily if that helps diplomacy or not, but it definitely throws a lot of things in question and in jeopardy here at the G20, as this was one of the most expected meetings that everything else kind of channeled off of. In fact, following his meeting with President Putin was going to be the meeting with Xi Jinping in China. And that was, they were going to be talking about trade and tariffs, and obviously the Russian role had a very big part of that because they're talking about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Now, a lot of questions are going to also be going, as we were already talking about Saudi Arabia's role in this and how people were talking about if anybody was going to talk to the crowned prince and who was going to stand by him. He's kind of like the stinky kid in the school picture. Nobody wants to be by him. And yet, you did have Vladimir Putin say he would meet with them. You also had a request made to meet with the president of Turkey. And so all of this is kind of now up in the air. Now, prior to this, I will say, you had both Germany and France that they were going to continue the discussions with Russia, and we're hoping to continue those discussions today with President Putin, talking about the pipelines and the oil and gas trade that is going on. So prior to the last 2 hours, everything was going right alongside. There were a lot of definitely some tensions that were going to happen, but people were expecting things to kind of fall into place. Now, unfortunately, it seems like this is going to be a big dominant conversation. The question is where do we go from here? This is interesting with President Trump because normally he doesn't necessarily confront, he doesn't just back off. Why, most people are going, why didn't you just actually meet with President Putin? If you have such an issue with Ukraine, why don't you actually meet with him face to face? That does a lot better than sending out a tweet. That's definitely a stronger message. So as this story continues to develop, and I guarantee it will, we're going to see exactly how everybody reacts to this new news. President Putin himself said, you know what, that's fine. I'm going to go meet with other leaders. Hopefully, my biggest concern right now is if President Putin decides to call President Trump's bluff and say, you know what, fine, I'll give you back the soldiers, is the meeting back on? Lots of questions, not a lot of answers. That's why you need to stay tuned to RT America, because I promise you, we're following this story.
Thanks so much, Scottie. With the Trump-Putin meeting in question, we're joined now by Nebojsa Malic, RT web producer, and Caleb Maupin. Caleb, you are following this for RT International in New York. Why do you believe President Trump would wait and make this announcement now, especially, as Scottie noted, after he just a few hours ago was talking about meeting Putin?
Yes, there's been no big change in the situation regarding the sailors. That's the official reason that Trump gave on Twitter for canceling the meeting. But there's been no change. There's been no dramatic development. Everything was planned to proceed. The meeting was going to take place as expected. And now, at the last minute, people are saying, it appears, and we see on Twitter, Trump saying that this meeting is off. Now, people are reading things into this. This is making people think there's something else going on here. Now, people are looking into the fact that that it appears that in court, where Michael Cohen just made a plea deal, we have some revelations regarding Trump Tower and the negotiations regarding a Trump Tower being built in Moscow continuing. And people are wondering if at this point maybe it's just not strategic for Donald Trump to be photographed with the Russian president. Now, you know, we know what happens in the aftermath of every meeting between these two world leaders. The U.S. mainstream media goes into an overdrive with its narrative about Trump and Russia collusion and all kinds of allegations, and we know where they go every time these two leaders meet. So people are wondering if this is more a strategic PR decision on the part of the White House and has not really much to do with sailors.
Neb, what's your opinion on that point? Because then the next question is, well, why did this agreement come down today? Is that timing not odd?
Well, if this is PR, it's incredibly stupid PR, because here's Trump insisting on enforcing the security of the U.S. border and then denying Russia to do the same with its border on sea, which makes him look foolish. It also makes him look doubly foolish for buckling to pressure to cancel the meeting, because all of his opponents and critics have been saying, oh, cancel the meeting over Ukraine. It sounds to me like a snap decision driven by his advisors more than driven by his instincts, although I'm obviously not in his head. But if it's a PR move, it's an incredibly stupid one.
Right, especially when you think about the fact Trump was making that point about refugees while Putin and the Russian state is responding to like armed ships coming into a sea. Caleb, some analysts pointed out the skirmishes on the seas may have been provoked in order to sabotage this meeting to begin with. Does that theory make sense to you?
Well, you know, a lot of forces are saying that, and that's been largely raised. Let's remember that Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, has roughly 8% approval rating. 8%. Less than 1 in 10 Ukrainians support their president at this point. And, you know, if you read the tweet from Trump, you would get the impression that Russia is just, you know, maniacally holding these sailors out of cruelty or something. Let's talk about what's actually happening on the ground there. Ukraine is under martial law at this point, right? They just torched a Russian consulate. A mob of fanatical supporters of the government there just torched a Russian consulate. It's not exactly, you know, just a calm situation, and Russia is just arbitrarily doing this. Things are rather intense, and the context is not being really examined here. And yes, the Ukrainian government is quite unpopular. I think that you know, it's not just unpopular among the people that rejected it from the beginning. It's also unpopular among some of the initial supporters who feel like it hasn't delivered on the demands. 8% approval rating for Poroshenko. I think there's more that meets the eye here, and that there's politics going on here all around.
And Neb, it's not as though these soldiers are being held by Russia for no reason. They've actually been charged at this stage. Can you talk about that? Well,
they've been charged with criminal trespassing, essentially, and they're being processed through the courts. They've sort of been in administrative detention. It's a routine procedure pending the trial and everything. I mean, this is, again, we were just talking about Maria Butina just a few minutes ago. Same thing, same procedure. Is Putin going to demand, you know, free our citizens or else? No, because there's a court procedure that's supposed to take place. There's a whole rule of law thing.
Not that rule of law
well,
thing.
No, obviously, because it doesn't apply to certain people. Exactly. No, the other thing that I'm sort of disconcerted about is that for years and years, starting with the Ukraine crisis, there's been a perception in Russia that the American administration, the previous one, is, to put it mildly, agreement incapable. There's an actual word in Russian for it. And unfortunately, this seems to be extending to this current administration, despite all the hopes on both sides of the planet that there might be some sort of way to breach the impasse. It seems like whether it's Trump himself or his advisors, or is the Russiagate finally getting the benefit of scuttling any sort of detente, it seems like the Trump administration at this point is fully embracing the policy of its predecessors.
And Caleb, talk about that excitement. What was at stake with this meeting if it had indeed taken place? Two very powerful leaders from two major countries playing in the world, and yet they can't even discuss mutual cooperation or anything, it seems.
Well, I think people were very optimistic about the upcoming meeting between the two leaders, just like they were optimistic about that meeting between Trump and President Xi that is, I guess, still supposed to be taking place, right? There's so much tension at this point, and people were hoping that things could be resolved. This was an opportunity to resolve issues regarding the situation with the soldiers that are being held. So I think people are greatly disappointed. You don't solve problems by not talking.
And that seems to be what everyone can agree on, a sad day for diplomacy. Caleb Maupin, RT International Correspondent, and RT producer Nebojsa Malic, thanks so much.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.